This is the very first webinar in a series of webinars that we will be having within the GLEAM project this year and in 2027 as well. And today we will be talking about zero emission zones, how, when, and for whom do they work. Before we go into that, I will tell you a bit about the project and also the upcoming online meetings we will have. We will be hearing about research that our colleagues from the University of Groningen have been doing. We will hear from Rotterdam about the city level perspective, and then you will have a chance to ask any questions or comment on what you've been hearing. So most of you probably already know about GLEAM, but we thought it would still be worth saying that GLEAM NSR is a 3.5-year-long Interreg North Sea project that in principle aims to support public authorities to keep implementing or developing ambitious policies for sustainable urban logistics. But what it does differently to many other projects that we've had in logistics is that it wants to ensure that it's not only larger enterprises, but also SMEs that can thrive through this transition. How are we doing this? Primarily through a lot of collaboration and talking. So we have these multi-level, multi-stakeholder platforms, which are actually ongoing right now in our cities. So the cities are hosting city dialogues with SMEs, logistics SMEs, but from different, let's say, sectors. We have expert and peer-to-peer support. Some of these webinars that we'll be talking about are actually part of the expert and peer-to-peer support. And then we also have the GLEAM NSR External Alliance. I have seen a few names here from cities that have already joined the alliance. Just for everyone to know, we have about 15 at the moment. We would like to have around 20. So if you're not part of the alliance, do get in touch. And you might also hear from us directly. We have about 3 million euro to do this, and we're a bit over half of the project. These are the consortium partners. So the project is led by the University of Groningen, and we have 5 cities and different kinds of industry and policy partners. In terms of upcoming events, you will see a very long list here. We're starting today. We will meet again in February once to see what sort of capacities and capacity gaps logistics SMEs have, and also what public authorities can do to support. We will have a perspective from the GLEAM cities and countries, but also extra information coming from France. We will then be meeting towards the end of February to talk about constructions logistics. We have another webinar in June. We don't know exactly the date yet, but we will be focusing on the role of consumers in supporting green logistics. We think that's also really important and a bit overlooked. So we want to bring a bit of light there. We're also going to talk about green procurement towards the end of June. And then next year we have 2 more topics, one of them being psychologistics, which we know is very popular amongst public authorities, and then also service logistics. And here we include everything from window cleaners to any repair persons and so on. If you, your company, or your city are very interested in sharing something that you've done in any of these topics, do get in touch with us, because we don't want the webinars to be only led by GLEAM partners, but also by other organizations that might have experience in this. So we would really like to expand the invitation for speakers. This was a bit about GLEAM NSR, and I see that we now have 39 participants, so we can get going with the content for today. I will pass it on to you, Paul, to tell us what you've learned in the Netherlands.
Yeah, thank you, Lorena, for the introduction. I'm Paul Buys. I'm from the University of Groningen, lead partner of GLEAM NSR, and I'm joined here by Anna Drijsjerf, and both of us are university teachers and professors with a keen interest in logistics in general and urban logistics specifically. And I've had the fortune to already be confronted with sustainable urban logistics from 10, 11 years ago at the very beginning in the city of Groningen. And basically today I want to do a short journey with you. I am well aware that I only have 15 minutes or so I'm not going to do the whole backstory. And actually to keep me going, I start at the end, because where we are currently at in the Netherlands is that we have 18 zero emission zones installed in these cities throughout the Netherlands. And these have been established exactly a year ago, most of them, one or two of them somewhere later last year. So in 2025, these zero emission zones came into effect. But on the next slide, you'll see that what a zero emission zone means should not be misunderstood. There is various agreed transition phases for different kinds of vehicles. Actually, the schema is much more complicated than this summarizing figure is, because depending on your vehicle type and when you bought it, you may or may not have a few more years to enter these zero emission zones, even if your vehicle is emitting. So just as an example, here on the second line, you see these light vans with Euro 6. And if they were bought before the installment of the zero emission zone, you could keep using them until 2029. Right? So that is you don't need exemptions. This is baked into the policy in terms of a transition rule. Now, if you look at this figure, you'll see that it's not a nicely shaped cascading set of lines. And that will come back later, because there was some struggles that actually led that second line not to go to 2028, but to 2029. But I'll come to that. So zero emission zones are indeed mostly currently low emission zones with a very clear transition phase to full zero emission zones. And to summarize our experience of Anna and me, as I said already, more than 10 years ago now, I was already a professor here in Groningen and involved in various initial experiments, covenants, front runner groups, in which, irrespective of other places in the Netherlands, Groningen was very much experimenting with the idea of more livable, more sustainable logistics activities in their city center. In parallel, things were going on in cities like Rotterdam, and Jos will tell much more about Rotterdam later, but we were aware that Rotterdam and Amsterdam, other cities in the Netherlands, at that same time were also experimenting with various forms of engaging with logistics stakeholders in an attempt to get to zero emission or sustainable urban logistics. And basically that period ran from 2014 to 2019 with, as I said, all sorts of different approaches that we classify as preparation. And in parallel, at around 2016 in the Netherlands, the discussions about the Dutch climate agreement responding to the Paris Accord and European agreements started to take shape as well. And at the national level, targets were established to reduce CO2 emissions. And somehow these things got together and merged, as I will tell a bit about later. So basically the schema got nationalized, which also resulted in the ambition to have 30 to 40 zero emission zones by 2030. As we've seen, we're well underway with 18 currently installed and quite a few more announced for this and next year. And in parallel or subsequent to that, in the last 4 years or so, the focus really got to getting these things actually in place, which involves very operational things like having the right signage, having the cameras installed to actually monitor whether the vehicles coming in are still allowed, thinking about exemptions, thinking about supporting companies that may or may not have access or have questions about keeping access or not. So very on the ground activities to get these zero emission zones practically into place. And again, Anna and I had the fortune to spend a lot of time in Groningen and the rest of the Netherlands looking along. And in the remaining 10 minutes or so, I will share a few of our insights. And this first thing relates actually to this fact that the initiative started very local. And when I, in 2014, was sitting at these frontrunner tables with local entrepreneurs, which really responded to the drive of the city of Groningen to become both livable and clean, like the terminology was much more oriented towards having a pleasant, clean air city center. And that was what drove the initial experiments. It feels weird to call them experiments. It's a bit academic, but the first steps towards these zero emission zones were very much driven by local goals, which were also locally embedded and to which local stakeholders could easily attach themselves to and wanted to be front runner. And later, these supranational at the EU level or even the global level agreements about the Paris Climate Accord and the European Green Deal, which then cascaded down to the national level, right? Basically captured, reframed, influenced the debate what these zero emission zones actually, or these local initiatives would actually be for. And they got recast as a tool to get a 1 megaton CO2 reduction, which in the end maybe momentarily confused or distorted a bit these local ambitions, but in the end we saw that these things more or less got together, and there's room to both focus on the local and on these national targets, which help shape also the supranational targets. And on the next slide you'll see that we in the last few years mostly focused on these dynamics between the national level and the local level. And there's clearly different roles. So Jos from Rotterdam will later talk mostly about the local level, where in the end the decision latitude was to actually define the zone's boundaries, to ensure that there's local engagement, to actually make sure that the thing is implemented with the cameras and the signage so that it can be enforced. And also the responsibility to communicate to local entrepreneurs lay very much at this local level. Whereas at the national level, after the National Climate Agreement took hold and had these zero emission zones as a tool or a mechanism to reach the 1 megaton CO2 reduction, the national government became also responsible to make sure that these transition arrangements got into place, that there is a legal framework to actually have a thing called a zero emission zone, and the legal procedures to also allow or not allow specific types of vehicles. But crucially, in between, what we saw, especially in the transition from national back to local implementation, we saw the important role of alignment and informal and formal networks that sit between this national level and the local level. And this is one of the key aspects or key points of proof, I think, where we saw the importance of those networks. Because from 2014 onwards, I think don't take this figure too literally, but there was an increase in the probability that these zero emission zones would actually get into effect, right? As these local frontrunners really started to engage with cities of Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and Groningen to locally do this. And after it gained national momentum and was spread out over multiple zero emission zones, the probability of these emission zones becoming a success became even more likely. But then national elections shifted the national politic landscape, and momentarily it seemed very much like this was not going to be a thing after there was a parliamentary motion to actually postpone or even stop the installment, and later also to try and negotiate even more longer transitions and exemptions, which basically would have meant that these zones would not come into effect. And then actually these informal and formal networks kicked into action and very quickly made clear that actually it was in everyone's interest to have these zero emission zones. And what was interesting to me is that this was both done in collaboration or coordination across these different cities, where the aldermen and also policymakers were in close contact to have a single voice to say, we as cities and municipalities actually still really much want this and do not see a way back. But interestingly also, industry lobby organizations, such as the Organization for the Transport and Logistics in the Netherlands, they could have jumped on this negative sentiment to give the final blow, but instead they very much did the opposite and said, we have been telling our members and our industry that this is coming. Our members and the industry is preparing. It would be silly to turn back from that now and stop this. So indeed, the formal and informal networks in between the national and the local layer, from our perspective, really got it back on track and made these zones implemented. Now, that's not to say that there's no bottlenecks, right? So a few things that we observed over the last few years is that there's definitely a capacity issue, like in a very physical sense of the word capacity. So there is in the Netherlands a strong grid congestion issue. So as we ask companies to electrify, they run into issues that they can actually, some of them cannot get the connection to the grid necessary to charge their vehicles. And also in terms of digital capacity, there were some issues in terms of how to manage the exemptions and whether that should be done at the local or at the national level. These have now been largely resolved, but that was definitely a bottleneck, like how to manage the fact that individual specific subgroups of companies could keep having access to these zero emission zones. Now, there was also a risk or is it a risk? Maybe it's more like a trade-off, like whether policies would be harmonized. So if you enter Rotterdam, you would see the exact same thing as in Groningen. And if you have an exemption in Groningen, you also have an exemption in Rotterdam, or whether it should be more locally adjustable to accommodate the needs of your local entrepreneurs. Like there was a bit of a debate going on to the extent to which everything should be harmonized, which mostly was pushed by the national lobby and industry associations, assuming their members wanted the same exact measurements everywhere. Whereas especially smaller companies were also saying, yeah, but we don't care. We only operate in the city of Groningen and we want to be heard locally and get an exemption locally if we deserve one. And we don't care whether that is harmonized or not. And maybe indeed the harmonization would hamper that. The last point of a bottleneck that the GLEAM cities and partners are very much aware of is how hard it is to actually get in touch with SMEs and also make these small companies aware that they'll be listened to and that their needs can be accommodated. And that's an ongoing challenge that we are tackling in this project. And why do we have this focus on SMEs? Well, first and foremost, because like here we have this stat, like 99% of road carriers have less than 50 employees. We could have all sorts of stats. There's a lot of companies that are even way smaller than 50. Like we could also have a stat like how many percent of the companies actually are single employee. And these are road carriers, like companies that own the asset being the truck. But we also spoke to plumbers and painters and window cleaners. Their core business is not actually moving things and owning the truck. Their core business is doing and delivering services in cities, and those are also small companies. And these small companies do everything in their power to make their small company as successful as it can be and to have sustained and sustainable business operations. And for them, logistics and all these regulations could be more of a peripheral thing, a nuisance, and they may not pay attention to the Dutch logistics news every day because it's not their core business. And even if they would, maybe they would not have the capacity to actually react. So we, as GLEAM partners, are really aware of this and try to develop innovative ways to address this challenge of SMEs, and this is why. My last slide is a bit geared towards public authorities, also meant as a bit of a bridge towards the Rotterdam part of this presentation. But to us, the implications, if you are a public authority and you are thinking of zero emission zones, predictability, clarity, that's what companies ask for. So maybe we're echoing a bit the things that you would also read in the news in that sense. In terms of these physical challenges and infrastructure challenges, design for implementability, right? If you have the data in place and you know how your logistics is currently ongoing in the city, you can use that to project future needs for electrification, for example, which also implies start early. So here we say a 3 to 5 year roadmap, but I just gave you a high level overview of a 10-year roadmap. So this is one for the long breath, we say in Dutch, which probably doesn't translate into English that well, right? But this is it's a marathon, not a sprint. That's a better way to put it, I think. And finally, these last two bullets about harmonization and making things SME proof are also very much meant as maybe being a trade-off to some sort. And harmonization is especially good for companies that visit a lot of cities. SMEs not always visit a lot of cities and maybe want a more localized approach to these kinds of access rules. And it is good to think about these two things in parallel as you are designing and then operationalizing and finally implementing zero emission zones.
Thank you very much, Paul. This was actually really interesting, and I think it's unusual to hear this perspective. We often hear about the cities and the pathway to implementation, the hurdles, and so on. We do have time for a few questions in between the two presentations. I will kick it off with one question and then open for everyone else in the meeting. I found it really interesting when you were talking about the informal networks, and I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about who would be involved in these informal networks.
Shall I answer the question? So, as Paul said already, there are between aldermen of different cities, there are networks formed who already work with each other for a while, and then this way they exchanging information through different in different ways, different communication channels. Also between, I'm not sure if you would really call this informal, but between people, how do you call this? People in administrative work in the national level and on the local level who've already worked, because as Paul said it's a marathon. They have already worked with each other for a long time. I think Jos maybe also can add to this. And hereby forming connections and knowing each other, creating some trust. That's what we've heard in some interviews. And that also helped, especially in this when you had this figure with when there was some political turbulence and the implementation almost got halted. These connections really helped, is what we understood, to push the policy or to push implementation through.
All right, thank you. I think it matches well what we've heard in other cities as well outside of the Netherlands. So we know that it's been the case in Aarhus too, that it's often the local community that would ask for change and that would support the public authority in actually implementing more ambitious policies. Okay, are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to raise? Yeah, Kat, go ahead.
Sorry, can I ask? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Michael, and then we can
No.
That's
Okay,
go, Kat.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't.
Okay.
My screen was funny for some reason.
Thank you. I wanted to ask if you have any experience identifying those SMEs who could potentially support the cause and who can be the front runners. You mentioned that one of the bottlenecks is to actually find those and contact. And are there any tips for the public authorities how we can actually distill them?
Yeah. So what we notice is that, or what we learn from cities, is that contacting SMEs, because there are so many, as we already also saw in the slide, contacting them one by one is really difficult. So there have been some cities that do this, but that's really, I think Rotterdam goes very far in that. With maybe Jos will add it, so I don't want to take his story already. But from Groningen, for example, they mostly have contact with business interest groups, so trade associations, for example, a trade association for construction or service companies like plumbers and technicians, for example. So through these trade associations, they have bi-monthly meetings, for example, where they meet with all these different groups to get in one meeting, and then they share what they are planning to do, how the implementation timeline is going, or they share experience from the number of exemptions or the number of questions from companies, and then they depend actually on these groups to then contact their members. That's mainly how it.
Yeah, and I think another tip from another project, like I was also involved in ULAAT, EU project, and one of the lessons, like one of the successful pilots we did there was with a shared electric vehicle. Actually, it was the very first ID bus driving in Europe, and in that project we actually paid the small companies for their efforts. Like we are so used to paying either universities, although not that much, or consultants, maybe a bit more. But then when it comes to these projects, we sort of assume that SMEs do it out of the kindness of their heart and because it is like valuable to participate in these kinds of projects, which maybe is right, but it certainly doesn't harm to also think about financial compensation to join in these projects and to keep people engaged and actually involved in ongoing experiments. That doesn't need to be a super high fee, but a fair hourly rate goes a long way. So that's one other good example. And maybe one caveat is after you involve SMEs, for example, in ongoing pilots, you send a signal that you are moving in a direction of, for example, a zero-emission zone. If the time then until the actual implementation of that zone is too far away, you may actually lose the very front runners because they feel they are figuratively overtaken left and right by their competitors with the diesel alternatives, right? Which can be very discouraging. So that's maybe sort of a cautionary tale.
Thank you. Thank you all. Mike, go ahead.
Oh yeah, thanks. It was very interesting. Sorry, I got confused about how to raise my hand and so on.
No worries.
I just wondered, I have a very short question really about the complication of having exemptions with quite complicated set of dates and levels of types of vehicle that can be used. It seems to me that that's good in one way because it shows that you're trying to sort of adjust to people's requirements, but in another way it seems to me to be potentially expensive and a bit confusing. And I wondered whether that was something to maybe think about. And the second was really, I think you've touched on it actually. It's like, how do you know, is 4 years the right amount of time to give people? Is 5 years? The vehicle replacement cycle's longer than that when the economy isn't so good. And maybe it should be longer, and it would be, or maybe too long and you lose people. I think this length of time is very interesting, but it's not really a question. It's just to say I think it's very good you bring that up. But on the other one, you don't have to really answer it. It's just to say, it seems to me that if you start giving exemptions, it's quite complicated, and there must be very complicated rules about whether you can give your brother the vehicle you bought or somebody else, and then it's still okay because it was always okay as a vehicle.
Yeah. So maybe I can very quickly say something about it without again. We haven't coordinated fully with Jos,
Okay.
so I'm on a slippery slope. But like, so what helps is these transition rules because they give the clarity as to what will happen, right? And on the one hand, the transition rules in the Netherlands are fairly complex, and they definitely require ANPR, like an automatic number plate recognition, to enforce them. But on the other hand, they're also relatively clear and homogeneous. Like this holds for everyone. So that's not the exemptions that we were talking about. Those are the transition rules, and they hold generally. Then the exemptions are given a bit more free, like a bit more case-based, say, and that's a complicated web of things that maybe goes too far for this specific webinar. But there, your concern raised is very valid.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Let's take one last comment or question from Karin, and then we go to Jos's presentation.
Yes, thank you. I was very interested by all this presentation, but I just wanted to make one comment. At the moment in France, the low emission zones are being cancelled from the law. Even though in my territory we had Institute 1 and we had made all this consultation with actors and SMEs and also big companies and citizens. We went through a whole process to introduce this low emission zone. Yet it has been attacked, it has been opposed at a national scale also. And as a result, it has been cancelled from the law. We now have it, but we can't enforce it. So I don't know what it means at a European scale, but this is the truth. This is the reality we have here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think it's not just in France. We see it in Spain as well, and probably other countries too. So we might even have a follow-up webinar next year to look at.
Yeah, and it actually it was very close to happening in the Netherlands as well. So maybe that point didn't come across clearly enough, right? But without WhatsApp groups of aldermen, I don't know what would have happened.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, we can now go on to your presentation, Jos. So just let me know when to switch the slides.
Yes, I'll gladly take over. So please present the next slide. Well, of course, I'm tempted to add my addition to the answers provided to the questions before. Perhaps I can weave them in my story because I've taken a slightly different approach in the sense that I communicated this with Paul and Anna that I would like to present, let's say, more of the present situation and our view of the future rather than look back as well, because the historical part was already covered in the previous part. And I just summed up some 7 things that are on our mind as a city that has already implemented a zero-emission zone, actually the largest one in the Netherlands. And that keeps us busy, quite sure. So I'm not. I have a couple of colleagues that are still devote a big part of their time to the operational running of the zone and also this transition scheme, which Paul correctly indicated to Michael. It's not an exemption scheme, but it's a transition scheme. This was not the original plan. The original plan announced 2020, so 5 years ahead of time, was to have a fully zero-emission city logistics within the zone boundaries. And then actually the Transport Association, TLN, which is a very influential party in the Netherlands, they use their influence actually to suggest, and you might even say impose, the transition scheme, specifically because of the write-off period, which Michael mentioned. So the economic lifetime of vehicles is very different going from one economic segment to another. If you have a light commercial van, this may be replaced within 3 years for the well-to-do companies, but very specialized and expensive vehicles may run for more than 13 years. So that's 1-3. And I think it was rightfully pointed out by TLN that they need more time. So 5 years simply isn't sufficient. So that's one thing we have to deal with. And Michael is quite right that this complicates matters because you have to take into account in your exemption scheme as well that if one of the reasons for getting an exemption is that your vehicle simply isn't available. So it's technically not available. So even if it's not a matter of finance yet. And another problem can be that it's available, but it's extremely expensive. And especially small companies then have a problem because they cannot afford to invest in such a vehicle. So let's get back to the story I originally intended to tell. So one of the things I'd like to share with especially the the cities attending from outside the consortium, but it's also, of course, a message for the consortium partners. We have to choose our battles. We have a limit, even if we have a relatively much capacity personnel to cover the topic of city logistics. We are still limited. And then one example of a practical dilemma is we are on the threshold of warning the new generation, so the Euro 5 emission class. They are going to be phased out by the 1st of January next year. So already now we are thinking about communication this target group. And some of them may already have an exemption, but it's a temporary exemption. It lasts for 1 year, and then you have to renew it. And of course, it's a very good idea to, if someone has a temporary exemption, to warn them in advance that it's going to expire and that you need to take action if you don't want to get into trouble. That is, you run the risk of getting a fine for entering the zone with a vehicle that's not allowed formally. But this good idea, which all cities approve of, ends up on a list, a long, very long list actually, which is, let's say, connected to the contract we have with the authority carrying out the exemption, so the national coordinated harmonized exemption desk. And then, so we decided this is important, but we're not going to put too much effort into this service level. Please give us our next slide, Lorena. Another issue we run into is privacy regulation. Well, I've described here that sometimes we like to know as much as we can about every vehicle entering the zone. And actually, we already know by ANPR technology the license plate. But technically, it's possible to find out if you combine the right databases. So who is the owner of the vehicle, which company, to which economic segment does it belong, what is the address of the owner, and can we send an email to communicate with them, ask them things. So that could also help us, by the way, to improve our simulation tool with an independent data source. But then in discussing with our privacy officer colleagues, they say, yeah, there's a very important principle. You shouldn't collect more information than you strictly need. You need to justify why you want to know, find out so much about individual companies. And so that's something we have to deal with as well. We think we are doing an important task, but does it justify, let's say, this type of intrusion on privacy? Next one, please. There's another thing, the space issue. When we announced the zero emission zone, the company or the consultants advising us, they predicted that by 2025, and the original plan, which I mentioned is important, original plan was to be fully zero emission by 2025 for all vehicles. And then I think TNO correctly predicted, our consultant at the time, that at that date there won't be enough electric vehicles to get all the stuff into the city centers, into the zone areas. So hubs will be needed to reload the things carried into and the services carried into the city from non-electric vehicles to electric vehicles, and then a very efficient last mile into the zero emission zone. And we foresaw that would create a need for commercial space to actually have this reloading where it can take place. And then we found out over the course of time that, well, first this transition scheme was introduced, and then the need to change very quickly was not as acute anymore. And additionally, the market the availability of electric vehicles developed much faster than we foresaw. And then it becomes much easier for companies to say, well, I'm not going to change my way of operation by using hubs. I'm just going to switch to an electric vehicle at the latest possible time, because then I can keep on doing things the way I'm used to doing them. The only difference would be that I then have an electric vehicle. But this also created some problems in the sense that some real estate developers thought that they would do a good deal when providing hub space for the activities that would emerge because of the introduction of the zones, and then finding out later on that there's actually no business case anymore for such a facility. So that's one of the things I ran into recently. On the other hand, space still is important, we find. And we're also investigating this as part of the GLEAM project, because loading and unloading is an important activity in the logistic chains. And if you have to do this in a very dense city center, which is growing even denser for the foreseen urban development, then it also becomes important to prescribe that this should be done indoors as much as possible when you're developing or redeveloping parts of the city. Additionally, if you want to switch to light electric freight vehicles or cargo bikes for the last mile, these have a limited range. And so these vehicles need to be stored in a safe place. But this is also, of course, commercial space which needs to be available within the city center or near the city center, close enough anyway. And in addition, of course, you need to charge these vehicles. And the grid may be a limitation for that electric grid. And one thing I learned only yesterday, that from the national working group, an initiative has been taken to carry out pilots with cargo bikes being, well, let's say encouraged. I'm not sure if it's already, so it's a pilot. They're trying, what would happen if we ask or force cargo bikes to ride on the, not on cycle lanes, but on the road for other vehicles. That would, of course, relieve the burden on the cargo bikes, but it might create problems in the other part of the street. So we're really curious what that will deliver, and we'll be glad to share the results from both from Rotterdam and other pilots with the community attending this this webinar. Next one, please. Then another point that we're facing is efficiency. I think there will be a question by Jos Sluismans, who is attending, so that's always good, of course. But there is a general preference for downscaling the size of urban delivery vehicles. And from the company point of view, also the SME point of view, there may be a good economic reason for making this change. And we have some good examples in Rotterdam as well of entrepreneurs that have actually improved their business by, you could say, right-sizing the transport vehicle they use for their business. But we regularly quite often come across small entrepreneurs that don't really, let's say, take a professional look at the way they exploit the vehicles they have there that they use for their business. And in some cases, they may do better by actually outsourcing the transport and focusing their business on the things they actually make money with, and then leave the transport component, so to speak, to professional parties. But this is a shift which we're not really successful in getting attention for. So this is really hard because, of course, it also is a major change for entrepreneurs to make, and especially for small business, of course, it may have even more far further reaching consequences. For instance, if they also make private use of a transport vehicle, then it's not easy to give up a van if you also need it after work, so to speak. But then the last point, from the public interest point of view, there's not really a well thought through dialogue about okay, which are the criteria, objective criteria we're going to use for determining whether or not in a certain part of the city or a certain part of the day we want to allow or to keep out specific types of vehicles. So I think it's really important to get this discussion going, and then this ties in with another part of the discussion. I think it's in the next slide, so if you could move to it, please. Yeah. There's another term, a buzzword you could say, used in the Netherlands called autoluw, meaning with few cars. And it's more or less associated with improving living conditions in the part of city where that is made autoluw. The problem is, at least from our perspective, that the term refers to motorized vehicles in general. And we think that it's really relevant to make a distinction between motorized vehicles that professionally transport goods or deliver services and other motorized vehicles, meaning passenger cars for individual transport of people. Two problems arise. One is that if you generalize the measures aimed at reducing motorized vehicles, then you may actually harm the economic functioning of the city as a whole. I've used the example here. If you reduce the capacity of the infrastructure network to discourage motorized vehicle, then this affects all motorized vehicles, including the logistic vehicles serving the local economy, the urban economy. And the other point, of course, is the efficiency of such a measure, because the majority of motorized vehicles are passenger cars. So if you want to be efficient in this respect, I think it's almost impossible not to also develop a vision and a measure actually at reducing passenger car use. And there is, I think, a disbalance between how much we ask of the target group, the entrepreneurs, in reducing their use of motorized vehicles as compared to what we ask of or impose on the users of private passenger cars, motorized vehicles. Okay, next one, please. Then is zero emissions logistics the end station? Are we done? If all motorized vehicles are zero emission, well, that's probably not the case, but we need to find out. I think we need to prove as well as possible, as well as can be done. We need to prove that that there's actually still a traffic burden that we need to relieve, even if all motorized vehicles are zero emission. So then I'm referring to the definition of sustainability as, on the one hand, avoid exhausting limited material resources, and the other point, minimizing externalities. So if the externalities we minimize are air pollution and noise, then still the accessibility, the number of vehicles present in the environment, and there's maybe traffic safety as well. Does it ask of us that we reduce the number of motorized vehicles, and then specifically the vehicles, those vehicles used for professional purposes, so the logistic vehicles? And then with that, of course, also comes the question, this type of measures, policy measures, should they be issued by the economic department? Should they take the lead, or is it a mobility question? Well, there's the things we sort of struggle with, and I'd like to share with the public, because that was my intention. The next one, please. Yeah, it's the last one, actually. I think, and then I'm looking back as well, and this is an overlap, you could say, with the presentation of Paul and Anna and the Rotterdam case. This need of harmonization has created a very strong bond between cities, also with professional affiliations and individual companies. That's also the case, but specifically that cities have similar needs also helps develop a bond, and I think primarily even at the personal level. If you know who in Amsterdam is doing the same job as you are doing in the Netherlands, or it may also be the case for Gothenburg, for instance, or Leuven or Le Havre, then this can really help in organizing good cooperation. And I think that this situation that the people involved in various cities in the Netherlands primarily in introducing the zero-emission zone, they also face the same questions I just shared with you, the same issues. And then in very many cases, they can help each other by joining forces. I mentioned some examples here. And of course, it's important that the national government also plays its role in stimulating and supporting this. And then, of course, some things even ask for cooperation beyond the national level, such as enforcement of foreign vehicles. This requires European legislation. And of course, you need to bundle your forces, and then it's good if you know whom to address in Paris or Lyon or in Berlin, for instance. And then, of course, and this is not because I have to, because I really feel it, that transnational cooperation in international projects is really also gives a boost to the building and maintaining of these professional relations. That was my last slide, and I'm happy, of course, now to answer any questions this may have risen.
Thank you, Jos, and thanks for asking all the hard questions, because I think that shows us that you're not just implementing the latest trend, but you're actually thinking of what will happen to everyone involved. Before we go into questions and comments, I just wanted to leave this slide on. If you want to connect with us, you have different channels here, so please get in touch. And we have about 7 minutes for questions and comments. I already saw a few things going on in the chat, some databases about entrepreneurs that are using cargo bikes, both in the Netherlands and in Belgium. So thanks for sharing those. And I think there was a comment from Jos saying that cargo bikes can already use the road. If I understood well, Jos Streng, the point you were making is that they might have to, not just be able to. Was that the difference?
Yeah, perhaps I should add here, Lorena, that actually we had a workshop about the model instrument we developed to analyze the question, what would happen if we maximize the number of cargo bikes, and one of the foreseen outcomes could be, we haven't carried out a study citywide yet, but it might be that it's necessary, if we want this, that we have to take measures such as moving them to another part of the road.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Karin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My question or comment is about what is it exactly that we have to understand as a small vehicle? Okay, cargo bike is obviously very small, but a truck is big, and in between there are several scales. Yes, so what do you in your city consider small vehicle?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Thank you for raising that. Actually, what I intended to share with you is that there's in general always the possibility, of course, to consider: do we use let's take the largest possible vehicle. It could be a box truck with a trailer or a big container, down to me or you carrying your own object to your home from the shop, and everything in between. So a cargo bike, but also a light electric freight vehicle, a van. You have small vans, you have small box trucks, large box trucks. Actually, let's say there are at least 3 levels. One is box truck to van. So to put it very simply, you could say, do you prefer 10 vans or one trailer, a truck with trailer? And then for every van, you could ask, do you like one van or a number of vehicle cargo bikes? And it may differ if cargo bikes can substitute one individual van, or that several trips would be needed to transport the same cargo. But it's not limited to only cargo bikes. It's just, in general, the substitution or the choice, so to speak. So what is the maximum size, you could say, you want in a specific part of the city or a specific street even at a specific time? That was what I intended.
Thank you, Jos.
Does this answer your question, Karine?
Yes, it all depends indeed. Thank you.
Okay.
Ward, go ahead.
Yes, I joined a little later, so sorry, maybe this has been already addressed, but obviously these zero-emission zones are part of a package of policies. And I wonder whether both contributors could reflect a bit on what is unique about this type of policy, and also under what conditions would it be maybe more successful than some of the other policies like pilots, subsidies, other kind of measures. That would be interesting.
Thank you. Jos, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I'll see if there's anything left for Paul or Anna. Well, I think what's exceptional to this development, it was mentioned actually, I think by Paul, that at a certain point, and that this was in between 2016 and 2020, there was a peak in momentum in public and political attention for climate change, and let's say the need was experienced that we need policies to do something about it, and this has actually in the course of time has changed. It was indicated that in France the national government has actually reversed municipal legislation that was ready for implementation. I think what was unique that there was a momentum, so there was a window of opportunity, and this was grabbed by all parties, even if they were not fully aware, I think, from my looking back, of all the implications it would have. So we had to put in a lot of effort, and also Michael mentioned earlier on that it's quite a complex transition scheme. It would have been much easier if we would have waited 10 or 15 years. But still, I think, looking back, we are satisfied that we took the trouble, because we are at a point very much advanced. And I must say, from day to day, I see a growing number of electric vehicles in the city center of Rotterdam, also the very large ones. And I really think that it also does work if people see it, they grow used to it, and they also experience the advantages. And this is still the very big trucks, which from other respects may be less popular, but they're not smelly. They don't make noise, and I think that's really an important point. But the unique part, to get back to the answer to Ward's question, I think is in the point there that there was a momentum that was acted upon. But I'm curious also, of course, on Paul and Anna's take on this thing.
Thank you. Anna, do you want to add something?
Yes. So Paul had to leave, so I will take this. So I think that compared to other policies like subsidies or policy measures, subsidies, pilots that are like city hub pilots. I don't know if that's a policy measure, but this is actually restricting certain vehicles from access, and I think that way it, like as also Jos said, that drives more direct change companies to have to act or invest in different types of vehicles. And I think that yesterday I saw the policy officer from Groningen. I don't think he's here today. But he showed some figures already showing that this year, you also probably also, of course, also had this from Rotterdam, but more electric vehicles and less Euro 6 diesel vehicles. While they can still enter, you already saw this change happening. And I think this restrictive aspect does, makes it unique.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it will be good to also follow up in a few months or maybe towards the end of the year to see how things have evolved, both in the Dutch cities and in French cities, Spanish cities that are currently maybe reducing their zero emission zones or canceling them altogether. It's also true that at European level, things are changing in terms of priorities. So let's see what the future brings. But for now, we will leave it here. It was really interesting to hear from the three of you. So thank you so much for your presentations. Thanks to everyone who's been here today. We hope you'll be joining our upcoming webinars and keep an eye on our website for news. We will also reach out to you via email, so you will get the invitations. And we would be, again, really pleased if some of you would also want to present anything related to your cities. Thanks and have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.